Let me just once again mention the focus of this particular approach. This approach says that public policies are the products of the public institutions, and it also says that the public institutions or government institutions are the structures around which all the politics takes place. The public institutions or the governmental institutions legitimize public policies, draft public policies, implement public policies, adjudicate public policies, and the government has power to punish the violators of public policies. The government can, through public policies, do all kinds of things, and therefore it's very, very important and pertinent for us to understand what are the various institutions of government and how these various institutions are linked to policy process. In the next slide, we have a picture of the institutional approach translated into the Indian milieu, and this we will focus for some time. Before we take a close look at the Indian institutional scenario, let me also mention that institutional approach focuses on 4 or 5 things. The first is about the structures. What are the organizations of government? A while ago I was mentioning that the government broadly has a threefold division into legislature, the lawmaking entities, the executive or the law enforcing entities, and the judiciary or the law adjudicating entities. We have this all through at different levels in our country. We have at the national level, state level, and also at the local level these 3 types of structures. So, the first focus of institutionalism is on the structures and what is the relation between these structures and the policies that are coming out. The second focus of study of the institutions is on the processes. What processes these institutions follow? Say for example, legislature. What are the processes? Bills are come, starred, the questions are asked, star questions, unstarred questions, maybe there are legislative proposals, all kinds of things, and how the process, what is the procedure actually in making converting a public problem into a public policy. So, the second focus of institutionalism is on the processes of these institutions. Every institution has certain processes, and what is the reality of these processes is the second. The third important focus of the institutionalism is on the behavior of these institutions or the actors in these institutions. Maybe in every institution there may be actors. If you take legislature, we have the lawmakers, you may call them MLAs, MPs, or maybe the board members, or maybe the general body members. These are the people who are taking decisions. So, what behavior they have? What kind of behavioral approach is throwing light on the reality, how actually they are doing. Maybe an MLA is supposed to do, they are all bound by oath of office. When they assume charge as a legislator, they make certain promises, but maybe or may not be that these promises are really adhered to and people do follow what they say, and the reality might be different from the ideal. So, this is what the focus of behaviorism is. And fourthly, there should be a study of the relations between these institutions. Sometimes public policies cannot see the light of the day unless they are vetted by many institutions. Just you take the case of a typical public policy, the life cycle of a public policy. Somewhere the idea starts in a political party platform. Some vocal member of a party makes a suggestion that we should do this, and it goes to party fora, and party fora, I think there is some discussion, some group is appointed to get into this. A bill is drafted, it is presented for discussion in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, it is put to voting, it goes to president's signature, all these things happen. So, therefore, how these relations are sometimes unless there are proper relations between various institutions of government, the law will be stunted. Its course of the law will be checked. The public policy cannot proceed beyond a particular stage, and therefore, the fourth focus of the institutional approach is what is the relationship between these institutions. I think giving another example is the relation between the federal government and state governments, or union government and state governments, between the state governments and the local bodies, or between one government and another. So, public policies are a matter of relation between institutions. Public policies are a matter of organizational structure. Public policies are a matter of processes of these institutions and the behaviors of the actors. I think all these things are in the focus of the study of institutional approach or institutionalism, institutionalist model of public policy. In one of the slides we have for presentation here, we have a graphic presentation of the institutional model of policy making or institutional policy model as applied to India. This one depicts that there are two kinds of institutions. The first is formal institutions and the second is informal institutions. What I mean by formal institutions are institutions which are officially established. Coming to the formal institutions, all public policies have their base or source in the Constitution of India. Constitution is the fundamental law of the land, and all public policies have to conform to the the Constitution. So, anybody who wants to understand the nature or tone of public policies in India has to first have some good understanding of the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution creates number of formal institutions. As we have earlier also discussed, it has created a legislature for making laws, it has created an executive, and it has created a judiciary. The legislature comprises at the union level, we have a kind of model where the union model is replicated almost at the state level, and of course local bodies also have some representative formal political governmental structures, but they are somewhat different from the state or national level ones. The parliament is a bicameral one where two houses together are needed to make a bill as an act. When it gets passed in these two chambers, it goes to the assent of the president, who is part of legislature. President is also part of the executive and part of the judiciary also. So, it is the point where the whole government there is a kind of culminates in the person of the President of India. And since in India we have the system of parliamentary democracy, there is a nominal executive and real executive. The President of India is a ceremonial head of the state. Legally speaking, all the powers of the government, the legislature, legislative, executive or judicial, are vested in the president, but he does not act on his own. There are various full-fledged institutions which cover this, and at the state level we have the same structure duplicated. Instead of president, we have governor, we have state legislature. Of course, in some states we have bicameral, certain states have chosen to be unicameral. You have again high court, you have the executive. In India, I think the judiciary is also highly integrated from the highest Supreme Court through the high courts to the district or subordinate courts. There is one line of judiciary running, and these are the formal institutions. They have their own functions, they have their own carved out rules. In addition to these formal structure, there are certain other formal structures, you may call them independent organizations or standalone organizations, which are not exactly the part of legislature, executive or judiciary, like the Union Public Service Commission, the Minorities Commission, the Information Commission, the Central Information Commission, the State Information Commissions, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the Lokpal, Lokayukta. These are all independent authorities. I think may not be that they are exactly involved in policy making, and In the policy process, definitely yes, they are involved. They have to implement certain of the decisions, and they have to regulate the political actors and all that. So they have some meaningful say in the policy making process. So thus, in the formal institutions, we have the structured institutions which are integrated part of the government, and there are some loosely hanging organizations. So they are also importantly figuring in the policy process. So I have mentioned that among institutions we have two sets of institutions: formal institutions, which are either created by the government through specific acts or created by the creations of the Constitution of India. There are also the political institutions or government institutions are not these are not the only things that are figuring in the policy making. There are some informal institutions also, like the political parties, the pressure groups, the employees groups, the employers organizations, the civil society organizations, the NGOs. So these are all the various informal institutions also, and sometimes their actions, say for example, I will give the example of Lokpal and Lokayukta. Lokpal and Lokayukta proposal was mooted decades and decades ago, and nothing much ever happened. And one civil society organization under the leadership of so when Anna Hazare sat on fast unto death, pressurizing the government to legislate, and an act was passed. The Lokpal Lokayukta Act was passed, and this act was put under cold storage for several years, and then once again he had to go on fast unto death, and then the government was hurriedly it has made a decision to appoint somebody as the Lokpal. Of course, Lokayuktas have been appointed in certain states, not all states, but Lokpal, an act was passed, and this is how the civil society organizations also matter. Although the legislature intended to do it, maybe because of the force of the civil society organization. So therefore, we have to admit that the only formal institutions do not account for all public policies. Public policies are either created out of compulsions of informal institutions, or even if they are created, they come into play, they come into life only because of the pressure and force of these organizations.